The wind chill had hit 30 below zero. The Montana state troopers had declared the mountain pass officially closed. There is a specific kind of breaking that happens when a king realizes his kingdom died with his children. Alpha Kalen Thorne, a man who could snap steel with his jaw, was on his knees. The pack house was preparing a death hall ceremony. They were ready to sing over empty caskets wrapped in white silk. But then the heavy oak doors of the great hall didn't swing open. They groaned, like the mountain itself was screaming. And standing in the doorway wasn't a pack warrior. It wasn't a rescue team. It was a human woman, rail-thin and trembling, cradled in a snow-crusted wool blanket. Her lips were glacier blue. Her hands were locked around something small, something wrapped in what looked like a blood-spotted bedsheet. What she said next didn't stop the funeral. It turned it into a crime scene. The grandfather clock in the Silver Pine Pack House Great Hall read 3:14 a.m. It was a monstrosity of carved mahogany and brass, installed when the pack house was built in 1887, and its ticking slow, methodical, relentless, sounded like a judge's gavel striking a coffin lid. The Great Hall, a cathedral-sized room usually thundering with wolf dominance displays and territorial arguments, was silent in a way that made ears ring. The towering stone fireplace at the far end was roaring, but the heat didn't reach past the first row of chairs. The velvet drapes, blood-red and heavy as theater curtains, were drawn tight against the blizzard that had been devouring the ridge for 72 hours straight. Alpha Kalen Thorne sat at the head of the obsidian table. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't moving. His golden eyes, normally molten with authority, were fixed on a scratch in the wood grain, the kind a child's toy truck might leave if dragged too hard across the surface. A crystal tumbler of whiskey sat 3 inches from his right hand. He hadn't touched it. Alpha. The voice was quiet, careful. Kalen didn't look up. He knew the scent before the sound, pine resin and old leather. Ryland, his beta. His oldest friend. The only man in the pack who could speak to him without permission. The SAR coordinator called, Ryland said. His voice scraped raw from 3 days of shouting orders into the storm. They're pulling the dogs. The drifts are chest-high on a shifted wolf. The medics said no mammal, not even our kind, could survive exposure past 48 hours in this cold. Not at their age. Kalen's hand moved. It didn't reach for the glass, it crushed it. The thick crystal exploded in his palm. Whiskey and blood spilled across the table in a widening pool, dripping onto the stone floor in fat, rhythmic drops. He didn't flinch. The glass shards buried in his skin felt like nothing compared to the sensation of his chest caving inward. They're 5 years old, Ryland, Kalen said, and his voice sounded like grinding stone. My sons are 5. They can't shift yet. They don't have their winter pelts. They're not warriors. They're babies. The twins, Toby and Wyatt, had vanished from the secured nursery wing 2 nights ago. One moment, the nanny had checked on them during their afternoon nap. Next, the window was open, the iron latch bent outward, and snow was piling onto their beds. The scent trail had been swallowed instantly by the White Death. The pack had mobilized 300 wolves. They'd torn through the forest until their paws cracked and bled on the frozen ground, howling the lost call until their throats gave out. The mountain howled back. Nothing else. We have to hold the ceremony, Ryland said, and there was something heavier in his tone now, something that sounded like duty-crushing affection. The council is demanding it. If the heirs are gone and you don't perform the death howl, the pack bond destabilizes. Wolves are already snapping at each other. 2 enforcers got into a dominance fight in the barracks last night. This grief is making us feral. Kalen stood so abruptly his chair shrieked backward on the stone. He walked to the fireplace, where the logs were collapsing into glowing coals. His reflection shimmered in the blackened iron grate, a king, still standing, but hollow. "You want me to sing a funeral song for boys I haven't buried," Kaelin said flatly. "I want you to lead," Ryland shot back, and now there was steel in his voice. "Because Lydia is in the council chamber right now, telling the elders that your grief has made you weak. She's saying maybe the Thorn bloodline wasn't meant to survive. She's saying maybe it's time for new leadership." The growl that ripped out of Kaelin's chest rattled the stained glass windows. Lydia, former Northern Alpha's daughter. A woman who'd wanted his throne, his bed, and his name since they were teenagers. A woman who'd made no secret of her contempt for Alara, the gentle Omega he'd mated and lost in childbirth. "Let her talk," Kaelin snarled, baring teeth that were already half-shifted. "If she says another word to me today, I'll rip her spine out through her throat." "And that," Ryland said quietly, stepping closer, "is exactly why we need the ceremony. To show the pack you're still their alpha. To show them you can lead through the worst loss a father can face. We assume the worst. We mourn. And then we hunt whoever did this." Kaelin closed his eyes. He saw Toby's gap-toothed grin. He saw Wyatt's obsession with building block towers taller than himself. He felt the phantom weight of them climbing into his lap during council meetings, their small hands tugging on his beard, their laughter cutting through centuries of wolf law like sunlight through stone. "Fine," Kaelin said, and the word tasted like ash. "Set the hall. We sing at dawn." The hours dragged. The sun didn't rise. The sky just shifted from black to the bruised gray of a corpse. The pack began to file into the great hall in silence. 300 wolves, warriors and mothers and white-haired elders, all dressed in the charcoal and ash-black colors of a death howl. They moved like ghosts, their footsteps muffled, their sense muted by grief. The chairs filled. The front row remained empty, reserved for the bodies that would never fill the caskets. Kaelin stood at the head of the hall, his hands clasped behind his back, his spine rigid. Ryland stood to his right. Lydia stood 3 paces behind him, her silver eyes gleaming with something that looked too much like satisfaction. The Death Singer, an ancient female with a voice like gravel and smoke, stepped forward. She opened her mouth to begin the first verse of the Lost Call. And that's when the doors groaned. Not open. Groaned like something massive and dying was being dragged across the threshold. Every head in the hall snapped toward the sound. The blizzard shrieked through the widening gap, scattering snow across the stone floor like bone dust. And standing there, framed in the gray light and the swirling white, was a human woman. She was small, skeletal thin, her clothes soaked through and frozen stiff. Her blonde hair was matted with ice. Her face was the color of a drowned thing. She was shaking so violently her teeth rattled. But her arms were locked around a bundle wrapped in something dark and stained. She took one step forward, then another. The snow fell from her shoulders like she was shedding a second skin. And when she reached the center of the hall, when every wolf in the room could smell the frost and copper and terror radiating off her, she looked directly at Kaelin Thorne. Her voice was barely a rasp, shredded by cold and screaming. "They didn't freeze," she whispered. The hall went silent. "Someone killed them. But before we dive in, I need to ask you something that truly matters to me. If you've enjoyed my stories before, or if you're here hoping this one will move you, please don't leave without subscribing. Without your subscription, YouTube buries everything I create. The people searching for stories that make them feel something, stories about resilience, love, impossible choices, they'll never find them. Because the algorithm decided I wasn't worth showing. I'm not asking for money. Just 30 seconds to hit that subscribe button so others can discover these stories too. I pour everything I have into every word, every character, every chapter. And knowing I could reach someone who desperately needs it but won't because you didn't click, that genuinely breaks my heart. Please subscribe. It costs you nothing, but to me, it means someone believes these stories matter. Now, let's continue. The two caskets were small. Too small. They sat on the raised dais at the front of the great hall, draped in white silk that had been stitched with silver thread in the pattern of running wolves. Empty. The word felt obscene. Kaelin had stood over them for 20 minutes before the ceremony began, staring at the polished pine lids, willing himself to feel something other than the black hole expanding in his chest. He couldn't. The caskets were props. Theater for a pack that needed closure more than truth. The death singer stepped forward, her ancient voice cracking the silence like thin ice. She wore the traditional mourning shroud, ash-gray wool that dragged across the stone floor, and her hands were painted with white clay in the old way. The pack rose as one, 300 wolves standing in perfect, terrible synchronization. The first note of the lost call climbed into the vaulted ceiling, mournful and primal, a sound that predated language. Kaelin's throat closed. He was supposed to join the song. He was supposed to lead it, to haul his sons' names into the void so their spirits could find their way to the hunting grounds. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. His wolf was silent. His human voice had shattered with the glass. Ryland's hand gripped his shoulder, steady and unyielding. The beta's voice joined the song, low and resonant, carrying the alpha's grief when he couldn't. One by one, the pack followed. The hall filled with the death howl, a rising tide of sound that made the chandeliers tremble and the firelight flicker. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. Lydia stood in the third row, her silver eyes dry, her mouth moving through the words with perfect, practiced precision. She looked like a queen already. Kaelin's hands curled into fists at his sides. His claws slid free, cutting into his palms. The pain was good. It was real. It was something other than emptiness. The death singer raised her arms, preparing for the final verse, the one that would sever the pack bond to the lost and release their souls. And then the doors exploded inward. Not groaned. Exploded. The iron hinges screamed. Snow and wind roared into the hall like a living thing, extinguishing half the candles in a single breath. Wolves snarled, shifting instinctively into defensive crouches. Kaelin's head snapped toward the entrance, his wolf surging forward, teeth bared. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the gray dawn. Human female dying. She stumbled forward, her legs giving out on the third step. A younger wolf lunged to catch her, but she flinched away with a sound like a wounded animal, clutching the bundle to her chest with hands that looked like claws. Her fingernails were black with frostbite. Her lips were split and bleeding. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Kaelin moved before his mind caught up. He was across the hall in seconds, his wolf driving him forward on instinct alone. The crowd parted. No one dared block an alpha in motion. He stopped 3 feet from her, and the scent hit him like a freight train. Frost. Copper. Terror. And underneath it all, something else. Something warm and floral and impossibly out of place. Lilies. She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She was shaking so hard he could hear her bones rattling. Her breath came in shallow, desperate gasps. But her grip on the bundle never loosened. "You're Kaelin Thorne," she whispered, her voice shredded. "The Alpha King." "Who are you?" It wasn't a question. It was a command that made the windows rattle. Jupiter Kirk. I'm nobody. I clean houses. I was driving through the pass when her voice broke. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. I found them. In a root cellar. Under the old ranger station off Highway 89. The hall went silent. Not the silence of mourning. The silence of a predator locking onto prey. Found who? Kalen said, and his voice was barely human now. Jupiter's hands trembled as she pulled back the stained cloth. The bundle shifted. Something small and gray and dusted with snow became visible. A paw. Then another. Then a face frozen mid-cry, with Kalen's own golden eyes staring at nothing. Toby. Kalen's knees buckled. He didn't fall, his body wouldn't let him, but the world tilted sideways. Ryland caught his arm, steadying him, his own face gone white as bone. There's two, Jupiter said, her voice breaking into a sob. I brought both. I carried them through the storm. I didn't know where else to go. Kalen reached out with shaking hands. Jupiter placed the bundle into his arms like she was handing him the weight of the world. The cold radiating from the bodies burned worse than fire. They didn't freeze, Jupiter whispered, and her eyes were wild with something that looked like terror and rage tangled together. Someone did this. I saw him. The medical wing smelled like antiseptic and pine needles, a combination that made Jupiter's stomach turn. She sat on the examination table, wrapped in a thermal blanket that crinkled every time she moved, while Dr. Heirs worked on her hands with careful, clinical precision. The pack physician was a lean wolf with silver streaking his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been treating her frostbite for 20 minutes in silence while Kalen stood against the far wall, arms crossed, watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. Ryland stood by the door. Lydia had tried to enter twice. Both times, Kalen had growled without looking away from Jupiter, and the beta had physically blocked the threshold. Tell me again, Kalen said, his voice low and controlled in a way that made the air feel thinner. Everything you saw. Jupiter's hands shook as Dr. Heirs wrapped gauze around her blackened fingertips. I took the back road. County Route 47. I was trying to save money on the toll. The storm got bad fast, and my car went into a ditch near the old ranger station. I thought I could wait it out. And? Kalen's joy tightened. I heard something. Crying. It was faint, but I followed it to a root cellar behind the station. The door was already open. Jupiter's voice dropped to a whisper. They were lying on the dirt floor. Both of them. They looked like they were sleeping, but their lips were blue and they weren't breathing. I tried to warm them up, but... You said you saw someone. Kalen stepped closer. His presence was suffocating, a wall of controlled violence. Who? Jupiter met his eyes, and something in her broke. A man. He was leaving when I got there. He didn't see me. I hid behind the woodpile. He was big. Really big. And he smelled. Like chemicals and wet dog and something sweet. Perfume, maybe. Expensive perfume. Kalen's hands curled into fists. What did he look like? Bald. Tattoos on his neck. He was wearing work boots and a heavy coat with a patch on the shoulder. I couldn't read it in the dark, but it looked official. Like a company logo. Jupiter's breath hitched. And there was a woman. She stayed in the trees. I only saw her cloak. Dark red. She called out to him. Said they needed to leave before the search parties came back. Ryland's head snapped up. A woman. She called him Marcus. The room went silent. Dr. Eris's hands stopped moving. Kalen's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising so close to the surface that the temperature in the room seemed to spike. "Marcus," Kalen repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "And a woman in red." He turned and walked out. The door didn't close. It splintered off its hinges. Dr. Eris worked in silence for 2 hours, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. The examination room adjacent to the medical wing had been converted into a makeshift morgue, the steel table covered with a white sheet that couldn't hide the small shapes beneath it. Kalen stood against the wall, his arms crossed so tightly his shoulders shook. He hadn't moved since the doctor began. Hadn't spoken. His eyes were locked on the sheet, golden and unblinking, his wolf clawing at the inside of his skull. Ryland stood beside him, equally still, equally silent. Jupiter sat in the corner, still wrapped in the thermal blanket, watching with eyes that looked too old for her face. Dr. Eris finally stepped back from the table, pulling off his latex gloves with a sharp snap. His face was gray. "Alpha," he said quietly. "You need to see this." Kalen moved forward like a man walking to his own execution. The doctor pulled back the sheet just enough to expose Toby's small arm. There, on the inside of his wrist, was a puncture mark. Tiny. Precise. Surrounded by a ring of discoloration that looked like a bruise but wasn't. "Injection site," Dr. Eris said, his voice clinical but strained. "Wyatt has one too. Same location. Same presentation." "Injection of what?" Kalen said, and his voice was so low it vibrated through the floor. Dr. Eris picked up a vial from the metal tray beside him. Inside was a dark purple liquid, viscous and wrong. "Wolfsbane. Aconitum lupinum. Concentrated. Pharmaceutical grade." He set the vial down like it might explode. This wasn't harvested from the wild. This was synthesized in a lab. Expensive. Difficult to obtain. Ryland's jaw clenched. "What does it do? In this concentration?" "Paralysis. Complete neuromuscular shutdown within minutes. They wouldn't have been able to move. Wouldn't have been able to shift. I wouldn't have been able to cry for help." Dr. Eris's voice cracked. They were conscious when it happened. They knew they were dying. The sound that came out of Kalen wasn't human. It was a roar that shook the walls, that shattered the glass cabinet in the corner, that made every wolf in the pack house drop to their knees in instinctive submission. His claws extended fully, his eyes blazing molten gold, his canines elongating as his wolf surged forward. "They were murdered," Kalen snarled, and the words were half-growl. "Poisoned. Paralyzed. Left to freeze like animals." "Yes," Dr. Eris said simply. Jupiter stood, her legs shaking, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The man I saw. Marcus. He had a medical bag. I saw it when he walked past. Black leather. With a red cross on it." Kalen's head snapped toward her. "An enforcer medic." "We only have one," Ryland said, his voice hollow. "Marcus Holt. He works security for the northern perimeter." "Not anymore," Kalen said. "Find him. Bring him to the dungeon. Alive." He looked at Jupiter, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer. Sharper. Like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're staying here. Under guard. If someone kills my sons, they'll kill you too." Lydia moved like a viper through the hallway outside the medical wing, her silver eyes glittering with something that looked like triumph wrapped in concern. She'd changed from her morning charcoal into a tailored black suit that made her look like she belonged in a boardroom, not a pack house. Her heels clicked against the stone floor with military precision. Behind her, 3 council elders followed like shadows, Elder Thorne, Elder Blackwood, and Elder Greaves, all old wolves with old ideas and older grudges. She stopped at the shattered door frame where Kaylin had exited, surveying the splintered wood with a slight tilt of her head. Then she stepped through uninvited, her chin raised in challenge. "Alpha," she said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "We need to talk about the human." Kaylin didn't turn around. He was still standing over his son's bodies, his hands braced on the edge of the steel table like he was holding himself upright through sheer will. "Get out, Lydia." "I'm afraid I can't do that." She moved closer, her scent, expensive perfume, and cold ambition filling the room. "The council has concerns. Legitimate concerns about the timing of this woman's arrival." Ryland stepped forward, positioning himself between Lydia and the Alpha. "She brought back the heirs. She witnessed the murder." "Or," Lydia said, her voice sharpening, "she's an accomplice." "Think about it, Ryland. A human woman, conveniently stranded near the exact location where the princes were hidden? A woman with no pack affiliation, no identification, no reason to be on our territory." She turned to the elders. "Doesn't that strike you as suspicious?" Elder Blackwood, a grizzled wolf with a scar bisecting his face, nodded slowly. "The girl could be a plant. A distraction. Humans have been used before to infiltrate packs." "She's half dead from frostbite," Dr. Eris said coldly, not looking up from his notes. "She carried 2 bodies through a blizzard for 6 miles. That's not the profile of an accomplice." "Or," Lydia countered, her smile razor-thin, "it's exactly the profile. Create sympathy. Gain access. Destroy us from within." She looked directly at Kaylin's back. "I'm formally requesting that Jupiter Kirk be detained and interrogated. By force, if necessary. For the safety of this pack." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kaylin turned slowly, and the look on his face made Elder Greaves take a step backward. His eyes were no longer gold. They were black, his wolf fully surfaced, his control a thread away from snapping. "You want to arrest the woman who brought my sons home," Kaylin said, his voice a lethal whisper. "I want to protect this pack from a potential threat," Lydia said, holding his gaze. "Even if you're too blinded by grief to see it." Jupiter stood from her chair in the corner, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I'm not your enemy." Lydia's smile was cruel. "That's exactly what an enemy would say." Kaylin took 1 step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Lydia's wolf whimper in submission, enough to make the elders bow their heads. "Touch her," Kaylin said, "and I'll bury you next to Marcus." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lydia's face went white, then red, her wolf rising to challenge the insult. But she was smart enough to know when to retreat. She bowed her head in a mockery of submission, her jaw tight with fury, and swept out of the room with the elders trailing behind her like obedient dogs. The door frame was too damaged to close, so her exit felt unfinished, a confrontation delayed rather than resolved. Jupiter stood frozen in the corner, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd just watched an alpha threaten to execute a high-ranking wolf. For her, a nobody. A human cleaning lady who should have kept driving instead of stopping at a root cellar in the middle of a blizzard. "Sit down," Kaylin said, his voice still rough but no longer a growl. He didn't look at her. He was staring at the sheet-covered table, at the shapes of his sons beneath the white fabric. Jupiter sat. Her legs gave out before she made it to the chair, and she caught herself on the examination table's edge. Dr. Eris reached out to steady her, but Kaylin was there first, his hand catching her elbow with surprising gentleness. The touch was brief, clinical, but Jupiter felt it like an electric shock. His palm was burning hot against her frozen skin. He pulled back immediately, staring at his hand like it had betrayed him. Your temperature's dropping again, Dr. Eris said, frowning. You need to be in a warm bed, not sitting in a morgue. I'm fine, Jupiter whispered, but her teeth were chattering. You're not. Kaylin finally looked at her, and Jupiter felt the weight of those golden eyes like a physical pressure. Ryland. Take her to the guest wing. 3rd floor. Post guards on her door. No one gets in without my permission. Alpha, the guest wing hasn't been used in. Now. Ryland nodded, his expression carefully neutral. He moved to Jupiter's side, offering his arm. She took it, grateful for the support, and let him guide her toward the door. But she stopped at the threshold, looking back at Kaylin. I'm sorry, she said. About your sons. I tried to save them. I tried. I know. Kaylin's voice was softer than she'd heard it. Almost human. You brought them home. That's more than anyone else did. Jupiter nodded, her throat closing. Ryland led her into the hallway, past wolves who stopped and stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. She kept her head down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Behind them, in the examination room, Kaylin stood alone with his grief and his rage. His wolf was pacing inside his mind, snarling, demanding blood. But underneath the fury was something else. Something he didn't have a name for. When he touched Jupiter's arm, when her scent, lilies and frost, and something warm, had hit him at close range, his wolf had gone still. Not calm. Still. Like a predator that had just found something it didn't want to kill. He looked down at his hand, at the faint trace of her scent still clinging to his skin. What are you? He whispered to the empty room. The dungeon beneath the Silver Pine Pack house was older than the building above it. It had been carved into the mountain itself during the 1800s, when pack justice was swift and brutal and didn't require paperwork. The air down here tasted like iron and wet stone. The torches mounted on the walls cast shadows that moved like living things. There were 12 cells, but only one was occupied. Marcus Holt sat chained to the wall, his wrists locked in silver manacles that burned his skin with every breath. He was a big man, 6'4" and heavily muscled, with a shaved head and a neck covered in faded military tattoos. His face was swollen on one side, where Ryland had hit him during the arrest. He wasn't struggling. He knew better. Kaylin descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall echoing like a judge's gavel. He'd changed clothes, traded his funeral suit for tactical gear, all black, all functional. His hair was tied back. His hands were bare. He wanted Marcus to see his claws when they came out. Ryland followed 2 steps behind, carrying a steel case that rattled with medical instruments. Behind him, Dr. Eris came reluctantly, his face pale but resolute. Marcus looked up as Kaylin stopped in front of his cell. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He smiled. Wondered how long it'd take you, Marcus said, his voice rough as gravel. Kaylin didn't respond. He pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the cell door. It swung open with a shriek of rusted hinges. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small space like a storm front. You smell like lilies and copper, Kaylin said quietly. Expensive perfume and old blood. The same scent Jupiter described. Marcus's smile faltered. That's the scent my sons had on them when she brought them home. Kaylin crouched down, bringing himself eye level with the chained man. The scent of their killer. I didn't. The backhand came so fast Marcus didn't see it. His head snapped sideways, blood spraying from his split lip. The silver chains rattled as he jerked against them. Don't lie to me, Kaylin said, his voice still eerily calm. I can hear your heartbeat. I can smell your fear. You're guilty, Marcus. The only question is whether you acted alone. Marcus spat blood onto the floor. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me. I can't. Marcus stopped, his eyes going wide with genuine terror. She'll kill me. She'll kill everyone. Kalen leaned closer, his golden eyes boring into Marcus's skull. I'm going to kill you anyway. The only choice you have is whether it's fast or slow. Whether I make it hurt for hours or days. So tell me who hired you. Tell me who planned this. Tell me who ordered my son's execution. Marcus's breath came in ragged gasps. The silver was burning through his skin now, blistering it, making him shake. But it wasn't the silver making him sweat. It was the fear. The woman in the red cloak, Marcus whispered. She paid me $50,000 in cash. Said it was just supposed to be a scare. Take the kids, hide them for a few hours, make you look weak in front of the council. But then she gave me the wolfsbane. Said to use it. Said, his voice broke. Said the bloodline needed to end. Kalen stood slowly, his entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. Her name, Marcus. Marcus closed his eyes. Lydia. Jupiter woke to the sound of voices arguing outside her door. The guest room was enormous, decorated in dark woods and deep burgundy fabrics that looked expensive and unused. The bed was so soft she'd sunk into it like quicksand, and for the first time in 3 days, she'd slept without dreaming of frozen children. But now the shouting dragged her back to consciousness, sharp and angry and close. The Alpha said no visitors, a male voice growled. I'm not a visitor, I'm the goddamn Beta, Ryland snapped back. Open the door or I'll remove you from duty. The lock clicked. The door opened. Ryland stepped inside, his face tight with something that looked like barely controlled chaos. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling hard. You need to leave, he said without preamble. Tonight. Now, if possible. Jupiter sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. What happened? Marcus confessed. Named Lydia as the one who ordered the hit. Kalen's going to arrest her within the hour, and when he does, this place is going to explode into a civil war. Ryland ran a hand through his hair. Half the council is loyal to her family. They'll fight. And you're the witness who started all of this. You're a target. I can testify. You can die, Ryland cut her off. These wolves don't care about human justice. They care about power. And right now, you're a loose thread. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I can get you out. I have a truck fueled and ready. I'll drive you to the state line myself. You can disappear. Start over. Forget you ever saw this place. Jupiter looked at him, at the desperation in his eyes, and realized he was trying to save her. But before she could answer, the door opened again. Kalen stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He looked at Ryland with an expression that could cut glass. Leave. Alpha, I was just. Leave. Ryland hesitated, then bowed his head and walked out. The door closed with a soft click. Kalen stepped inside, his presence filling the room like smoke. He didn't sit. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back, his golden eyes fixed on Jupiter. I need you to stay, he said quietly. Jupiter blinked. What? The pack is unstable. Lydia's arrest will fracture the council. Wolves are already choosing sides. But when you're in the room, he paused, searching for words. When you're near, the aggression stops. The wolves are calm. Even the most dominant alphas go still. I don't understand it, but I need it. I need you. Jupiter's heart hammered. I'm not one of you. I'm human. I know, Kalen said, and something in his voice made her shiver. That's what makes it strange. He took a step closer. I'm offering you a position. Governess to the pack. A paid role. Protection. A place to stay. In exchange, you attend council meetings. You stay close during pack gatherings. You help me keep the peace. And if I say no? Kalen's jaw tightened. Then Ryland will take you to the border, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for Lydia's allies to find you. Jupiter stared at him. That's not a choice. That's a threat. That's reality, Kalen said. Stay or run. But if you stay, I swear on my son's graves, no one will touch you. The room went silent. Jupiter looked down at her bandaged hands, at the proof of what she'd already sacrificed. Then she looked up at the Alpha King. I'll stay. Dr. Eris had been a pack physician for 43 years. He'd treated gunshot wounds, silver poisoning, failed shifts, and complicated births. He'd seen genetic anomalies, rare blood disorders, and wolves born without the ability to transform. But he'd never seen anything like the test results sitting on his desk. He read them 3 times, ran the samples twice, cross-referenced them against every database he had access to. The results didn't change. Jupiter Kirk was human. Completely, genetically, undeniably human. No wolf DNA. No shifter markers. No supernatural lineage whatsoever. But her pheromone profile, the chemical signature her body produced, was identical to that of a wolf omega. Not similar. Identical. It was biologically impossible. Dr. Eris stood from his desk and walked to the small laboratory attached to his office. Jupiter sat on the examination table, still wrapped in the oversized sweater someone had given her, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. Kalen stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. Ryland stood by the door, silent and tense. The results are conclusive, Dr. Eris said, setting the file down on the counter. Jupiter is human. But her scent markers, her pheromone output, her biochemical signature, all of it matches a wolf omega. It's an evolutionary anomaly. I've never seen it documented, not in any medical literature, not in any pack history. Kalen's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means she's producing the same calming pheromones that a wolf omega would produce. Omegas are rare, 1 in every 10,000 wolves. Their scent acts as a biological stabilizer. It suppresses aggression in alphas, calms pack hierarchies, prevents dominance battles from turning lethal. Dr. Eris looked at Jupiter. Your body is doing all of that. Naturally. Without even trying. Jupiter's face went pale. I don't understand. I've never. You're not a wolf, Dr. Eris agreed. But your biology is mimicking one. It's why the pack calms when you're present. It's why Kalen's wolf went still when he touched you. It's why Lydia sees you as a threat. Because I'm controlling them, Jupiter whispered, horror creeping into her voice. No, Kalen said sharply, pushing off the wall. You're stabilizing us. There's a difference. Is there? Jupiter looked at him, her storm gray eyes wide. You're keeping me here because of what I am. Because of what my body does to yours. That's not a choice. That's biology. Kalen's jaw clenched. You chose to stay. Because you gave me no other option. The room went silent. Ryland shifted uncomfortably by the door. Dr. Eris cleared his throat, trying to defuse the tension. There's more, the doctor said quietly. Omegas bond with alphas. It's instinctive. Chemical. The alpha's protective instincts are heightened around an omega, and the omega's biology responds to the alpha's presence. It's not conscious. It's autonomous. He looked at Kalen. Your wolf recognized what she was before your mind did. Kaelin stared at Jupiter, and she stared back, and the weight of what Dr. Eris was saying settled over them like a storm cloud. What happens if I leave? Jupiter asked. The bond weakens, Dr. Eris said. But it doesn't break. Not immediately. Once an alpha's wolf has identified an omega, it doesn't forget. Jupiter stood abruptly, her legs shaking. I need air. She walked past Kaelin, past Ryland, and out into the hallway. Kaelin moved to follow, but Dr. Eris caught his arm. Give her time, the doctor said. She just found out she's the most valuable creature in your world. And the most hunted. The great hall was packed. Every wolf in the Silverpine territory had been summoned, and they stood shoulder to shoulder in the cavernous space, their scents mixing into something volatile and dangerous. The air hummed with tension. Whispers moved through the crowd like wildfire. Lydia had been arrested. Marcus had confessed. The Alpha's sons had been murdered by one of their own. Kaelin stood on the raised platform at the front of the hall, his hands braced on the obsidian podium, his golden eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. He looked like a king carved from stone, immovable, absolute, lethal. Ryland stood to his right, armed and vigilant. Dr. Eris stood to his left, holding a folder of medical reports like a shield. And beside Kaelin, in a chair that had been placed deliberately at his right hand, sat Jupiter Kirk. She looked impossibly small in the oversized sweater and jeans someone had found for her. Her blonde hair was clean now, pulled back into a simple braid. Her hands were still bandaged, but she sat with her spine straight, her chin raised, her storm gray eyes fixed on the crowd with a quiet defiance that made Kaelin's wolf purr with satisfaction. The murmuring stopped when Kaelin raised his hand. 2 days ago, Kaelin began, his voice carrying across the hall without amplification. My sons were taken from their beds. They were poisoned with wolfsbane, paralyzed, and left to die in a root cellar like discarded trash. The search parties found nothing. The storm covered the trail. We prepared to bury empty caskets. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. Some wolves looked down. Others looked toward the back of the hall, where Lydia stood in silver chains, flanked by 4 armed enforcers. Her face was a mask of cold fury. But one person didn't give up, Kaelin continued. One person walked 6 miles through a blizzard, carrying the bodies of children who weren't hers to bring them home. That person is sitting beside me now. Every eye in the hall turned to Jupiter. She didn't flinch. She met their stares with the kind of exhausted courage that came from having nothing left to lose. Jupiter Kirk is human, Kaelin said, and the word rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. She has no pack. No wolf blood. No reason to care whether the heirs of Silverpine lived or died. But she cared anyway. And, because of her testimony, we know the truth. My sons were murdered by Marcus Holt, under the orders of Lydia Crane, in a conspiracy to end the Thorn bloodline and seize control of this pack. The hall erupted. Wolves snarled, some in outrage, some in disbelief. Lydia's supporters shouted denials. The enforcers tightened their grip on their weapons. Silence. Kaelin's roar shook the rafters. The hall went quiet. Marcus has confessed. Dr. Eris has confirmed the cause of death. The evidence is irrefutable. Lydia Crane will stand trial before the council under pack law. If she is found guilty, the sentence is death by combat. Lydia's face twisted with rage. This is a farce. You're condemning me on the word of a human. I'm condemning you on the word of my enforcer, my physician, and the evidence carved into my sons' bodies, Kaelin snarled. Jupiter Kirk is a witness. Nothing more. Nothing less. He turned back to the crowd, his voice dropping to something colder, darker, more dangerous. But she is also under my protection. As of this moment, Jupiter Kirk is a guest of the Silver Pine Pack. She will be treated with the respect and courtesy due to any wolf under my authority. She will be housed, fed, and guarded. His eyes swept the hall, landing on faces he knew, wolves he'd fought beside, allies who might become enemies. And if anyone, council member, enforcer, elder, or rank-and-file wolf, lays a hand on her, threatens her, or attempts to harm her in any way, I will personally hunt them down and execute them. No trial. No mercy. No exceptions. The silence that followed was absolute. Jupiter's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Kalen, and for the first time since entering the hall, she saw something in his expression that wasn't rage or grief or cold calculation. It was possession. Primal, instinctive, and utterly terrifying. "This assembly is dismissed," Kalen said. "The trial begins at dawn." The wolves filed out slowly, their eyes lingering on Jupiter as they passed. Some looked curious. Some looked hostile. But none of them looked away. When the hall was finally empty except for Ryland, Dr. Eris, and the enforcers guarding Lydia, Kalen turned to Jupiter. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Jupiter looked at him, at the Alpha King who had just declared war on his own pack to protect a human he barely knew, and realized with cold, absolute certainty that she wasn't safe at all. She was claimed.